Imagine a family so consumed by resentment and control that they saw murder as the only way forward. They weren't impulsive, they weren't reckless. This was premeditated, methodically planned over months. They asked around, tried to get others involved, and when no one would take the job, they decided to handle it themselves. This is the case of the Maddox murders. Welcome to Slice of Darkness. This is your host, Alyssa, and let's start with a little geography lesson. Combs Neal, Texas. Or is it pronounced as Comus Neal? Honestly, I don't know. I can never figure it out. What I do know is that it's the kind of town you could drive through without even realizing you were in it. Tucked away in the northeast of Houston, it's home to just about 550 people. Yeah, super tiny town. The kind of place where everybody knows everybody. Which sounds quaint, right? But in towns like these, when things go bad, they don't just go bad. They unravel in ways that are almost too bizarre to believe. On the very outskirts of Combs Neal, you'll find Mount Carmel Baptist Church. And on the morning of January 18th, 2014, a man named Nathan Maddox and his wife, Krystal Maddox, were there with Nathan's 5-year-old daughter, Madison. But they weren't there for a church service. It was visitation day. Madison was Nathan's daughter from a previous marriage, and her mother, Kristen Westfall, was still very much in the picture. As Nathan, Krystal, and Madison left the church that day, a series of gunshots shattered the quiet. It was horrific, and by the time it was over, Nathan and Krystal had passed away. Nathan Maddox, 35, and Krystal Maddox, 31, had been married for about a year at the time. Nathan worked at Lufkin Industries, so if you ever needed measuring tape, he had you covered. Krystal, on the other hand, was the proud owner of all that sparkles and shabby chic peak boutique, which, the name's a mouthful. But aside from running her boutique, she also operated Krystal Maddox Photography and was heavily involved in local beauty pageants. In short, she was busy and deeply passionate about what she did. Nathan and Krystal weren't just partners, they were deeply in love. They had built a big, blended family together. Nathan had Madison from his previous relationship, while Krystal had 4 kids of her own, and they made it work. Krystal was an incredibly dedicated mother, always recording moments, planning elaborate costumes for Halloween, and throwing herself into her children's lives wholeheartedly. Growing up, Krystal was a bit of a handful. Her mother had encouraged her to go to college and get an education, but Krystal had always known what she wanted, to be a mother. That was her dream, her vision for the future, and she followed through. Just months after finishing high school, she got married and had her first child. 3 months after that, she was pregnant again. Life moved fast for Krystal. By 2009, though, her marriage had run its course. She and her husband separated, and she packed up her 4 kids to start fresh in Lufkin, Texas. That's where she threw herself into the beauty pageant scene, hair, makeup, costumes, the whole deal. And it was there, in 2011, that she ran into an old school friend, Nathan Maddox. Nathan and Krystal hit it off immediately. He adored her kids, which was huge for her. If you couldn't love her kids, then you weren't going to be in her life. It was as simple as that. But Nathan? He stepped right into the role, and it was like he'd always been there. At the time, Nathan had just gone through his own divorce from his wife of 5 years, Kristen Westfall. The two shared a young daughter named Madison, but things between them had ended on a sour note. Now, let's rewind a bit to give you some context. Back when Nathan and Kristen were still married, he was working out of state in Montana. He'd regularly send money back home to Texas, thinking everything was fine between him and Kristen. But one day, he came home to find the house empty. No wife, no daughter, just a letter accusing him of abandonment. Kristen claimed he had disappeared, that she had no idea where he was or when he'd be back, even though, in reality, she knew exactly where he was and when he'd return. And just like that, she cut him out of their daughter's life. She ended their marriage with a text message saying, "There really is nothing left between us. We both have changed. Too much has happened. I can't remember how it felt to be happy." For Nathan, it was devastating. Madison was his daughter, and he wanted to be in her life. And so began his years-long battle to get her back. Eventually, after years of custody battles, the court lifted the abandonment order, and he was allowed to see Madison. But custody arrangements aren't that simple. Madison still lived with Kristen and her parents, Paul and Letha Westfall, along with Kristen's younger brother, Cameron. Nathan had to arrange visitations, and that's where the trouble really began. Paul and Letha, Madison's grandparents, weren't exactly thrilled about Nathan's new marriage to Krystal. But Madison? She adored Krystal. She loved dresses, makeup, and all the glitz and glam of pageantry, something Krystal happened to be deeply involved in. The two bonded instantly, which didn't sit well with the Westfalls. In June 2012, Kristen filed for full custody, igniting another long legal battle. And when Nathan and Krystal got married, things really escalated. While Nathan and Krystal were focused on settling down and fighting for custody, Kristen was going off the rails. In August 2013, Kristen was arrested for meth possession, again. This wasn't her first time being caught, but instead of Madison going to Nathan, the court granted custody to Paul and Letha, the Westfall grandparents. And let's just say, they weren't any more willing to let Nathan and Krystal see Madison than Kristen had been. Krystal, refusing to back down, once went to confront them and recorded the exchange for proof. "You're saying we can't have visits, but I talked to our lawyer and he said that's not true," she told them. Paul and Letha weren't having it. They tried to shut her down, dismissing legal documents right to her face. They insisted that they had the upper hand, and there was nothing Nathan and Krystal could do to change that. Nathan and Krystal were desperate. They were working extra shifts, selling whatever they could, just trying to scrape together enough money to fight for custody. It was a battle between two sides, Nathan and Krystal, who just wanted to see Madison, and the Westfalls, who were hell-bent on keeping her away from them. But how far were the Westfalls willing to go to make sure Nathan and Krystal never got custody? As it turns out, they were willing to go all the way. After a long and exhausting battle, Nathan and Krystal finally managed to raise enough money and go through the entire legal process. And guess what? They won visitation rights. The court ruled that the visits would take place at Mount Carmel Baptist Church under supervision. Everything seemed to be going on fine, until tragedy struck. On January 18, 2014, at around 12:30 p.m., a chilling 911 call came in.
Charlie County 911. What's going on? What's going on? You heard shot? What's the door, please?
It was Letha Westfall who made the call, and she was clearly hysterical. When officers arrived at the scene, they found Nathan and Krystal Maddox lying outside the church, both fatally shot in what appeared to be an execution-style killing. The gruesome sight sent shockwaves through the small community. Thankfully, 4-year-old Maddie had been inside the church at the time and had not witnessed the murder. At the time of the shooting, Letha and a social worker from Child Protective Services had been inside the church, supervising the visit and ensuring everything went smoothly. It was actually the CPS worker who spoke to police, as Letha was reportedly too hysterical to communicate clearly.
Are they in the church? No. No, where are they at? They're out front. Okay, can you tell me what you saw? I just saw a lady lying down on the ground. That's all I could see. All right. So was she the only one outside? No, her husband was outside with her. Okay, who's her husband? Nathan Maddox. I think he may be the victim also. She was it's not good. Look at him. Okay, who's that in there with you? Lisa Westfall and a 4-year-old baby girl.
Nathan and Krystal had been ambushed and murdered in broad daylight during a supervised visitation. Neither Letha nor the CPS worker saw the shooter. As soon as the gunshots rang out, they locked the doors and immediately called the police. From the very beginning, it was clear this was a targeted attack. Nothing had been stolen, there were no signs of a struggle. This was a deliberate assassination. Investigators found a .30-30 shell casing at the crime scene, revealing the type of rifle used. While it was a fairly common rifle, police now had a clue on what kind of weapon to look for. However, as the investigation progressed, police made a chilling discovery. Nathan had not been shot with a .30-30 rifle, but he had been shot in the chest with a shotgun. This meant there were 2 guns, and that there could have been 2 shooters involved in this brutal ambush. Authorities quickly turned their attention to the Westfalls, the only people who had any real motive for wanting Nathan and Krystal dead. At the time of the murder, Paul, Kristen, and Cameron Westfall had not been at the church. When they were informed of the killings, Paul had a dramatic reaction. He had a seizure from the shock and had to be hospitalized. Some found this reaction oddly convenient, as if it were an over-the-top response to hearing that his most hated enemy had just been gunned down. Kristen was interviewed first, and she was open about her past struggles with Nathan over their daughter. She admitted that their custody battle had been ugly, but claimed that she still cared for him, saying that even though the both of them had their issues, she still had love for him in her heart.
Me and Nathan have had this issue with his substance abuse. We've had our disagreements, but the fact remains that I was married or with him for 8 years. Of course, I still have love in my heart for Nathan.
Can you think of anybody that would want to hurt Nathan?
Now, there's a lot of rumors going around. The motorcycle gang drove up at his mom's house and he was scared to death, and they told him that if he ever told about something that happened, they'd kill him.
Kristen also provided her alibi. She and her father, Paul, had been running errands at a store a few miles away at the time of the shooting. According to them, they were nowhere near the church when the murder occurred and had only just returned home when they got the news. Paul Westfall was also questioned and gave the same alibi as his daughter. Investigators conducted a gunshot residue test on him, but the results came back inconclusive. Despite the Westfalls' seemingly solid alibi, police remained suspicious. The tension between them and Nathan had been no secret. To ensure Maddie's safety, Child Protective Services stepped in and removed her from the Westfall home, citing concerns that the killers were still unidentified and that her living situation might not be safe. This decision sparked yet another legal battle, because of course the Westfalls weren't going to just let Maddie go without a fight. However, when CPS conducted a welfare check on their home, they found some disturbing issues. There was an unsecured firearm lying around, raw sewage in the yard, and, most damning of all, meth inside the house. Investigators also learned that Letha had allegedly been using the drugs to control Kristen. Whenever Kristen attempted to leave with Madison, Letha would reportedly blackmail her, threatening to call the cops and report her for drug possession, something Kristen had been previously arrested for. A month after the double homicide, authorities finally made a major breakthrough when a friend of the Westfalls, Christopher Eves, walked into the sheriff's office with shocking information.
Every time I would go over there, the father was always saying that the daddy tried to come take the baby, he's going to shoot him, kill him. That's all they kept talking about. They try to come take that baby, I'm killing them. We're going to have somebody kill them.
It turned out that the Westfalls had been planning Nathan and Krystal's murders for a long time. Instead of fighting a never-ending custody battle, they had decided that eliminating Nathan and Krystal was the more cost-effective solution. They could not stand the idea of Maddie spending even a single moment with the Maddox family. It was a case fueled by hatred and resentment, an unimaginable level of animosity toward a man who simply wanted to be a father to his child. And what made it even more depressing? Maddie had been living in a home surrounded by filth, drugs, and dysfunction, yet her grandparents had fought tooth and nail to keep her there. With the new evidence, authorities secured indictments for the entire Westfall family: Paul, Letha, Kristen, and Cameron. All four were arrested and charged with engaging in organized criminal activity. Investigators believed that if Nathan had lived just a little longer, he would have won full custody of Maddie. In fact, this particular visitation was expected to be one of the last supervised visits before the courts granted Nathan his parental rights for unsupervised visits. But before he could see that day, his life was cut short by those who hated him the most. And now, his daughter was left distraught because of it. Paul had a seizure during his arrest. He loved his family, and now everything was crumbling. Cameron Westfall was the first to be interviewed.
Now, have you ever heard Paul or Luther or Kristen talk about murdering Nathan?
No, sir. Nathan was like a brother.
Next, it was Kristen's turn.
We always were in the Nazi thought.
And Letha denied everything about asking someone to kill Nathan.
I literally have not had a conversation with somebody saying, will you murder Kristen or Nathan?
Meanwhile, Paul, after being released from the hospital, maintained his innocence.
Were you responsible for the shooting of Nathan Maddox? No, sir.
But the police were sure that one of them would break. With 4 people arrested, they only needed one weak link in the chain to crack. And Paul's weak spot? His children. But not Kristen, Cameron. 3 hours after his first interview, Paul requested another chance to speak. This time, he confessed.
Well, I had the gun when I killed Nathan.
So you're telling me that you killed Nathan and his wife? And who helped you? I want the whole truth.
Take care of my son.
I want the whole truth. You and Kristen?
Paul's confession wasn't just about taking responsibility, it was about control. but not in the way you'd expect. Because in that moment, when he finally admitted to the crime, his priority wasn't saving himself or even protecting his daughter, Kristen. No, the only person he seemed to care about was Cameron. "You take care of my son," that's what he asked the interrogators. He made sure to say it. It's almost like, in his mind, he was doing this for Cameron, as if this was his final act of fatherhood. Meanwhile, Kristen, he didn't just let her go down with him, he practically shoved her under the bus. No hesitation, no second thoughts. It's a twisted kind of favoritism, one that makes you wonder, was this guilt? Was it love? Or was it just another way for him to control the narrative, even as everything crumbled around him? Letha, when confronted with Paul's confession, responded that she had heard Paul yelling outside the church.
Paul ever say anything to you about killing me?
He'd say, I should just kill him and be done with it. I didn't take Paul serious because I would have never thought that Kristen would have ever been capable of doing something like that.
Kristen, however, continued to deny everything.
Well, I hear what you're saying, but some of it I know is not true.
I mean, if you can tell me anything that's not,
I guess give me something to think about, because the motive, the time color, the alibis, all of that depends on.
I mean, I don't know if y'all went to the store. I mean, you told me last time we were in there, we checked
I'm
out.
just saying, some of the things you're saying are not true.
I didn't shoot anything.
She insisted on her innocence, even as her own father testified against her. The police asked Cameron if the family had meticulously planned the crime, made notes, or drawn diagrams.
In the planning of all this, did they ever get together at home and sit down and make notes or draw diagrams? Or
they never once ever made notes for the pure fact, or diagrams. For the pure fact that my sister said it was best not to have anything on paper. Have a paper trail is what she called it.
Cameron then confessed that he had disposed of the murder weapons on Paul's orders. Why would Paul involve his favorite child in the crime? Because, in reality, Paul was a terrible person. On the day of the murders at 9:40 a.m., Letha was at the visitation at Mount Carmel Church. This was supposed to be the last supervised visit Nathan and Krystal would have with Maddie. After this, the Westfalls wouldn't need to be present during future meetings. Letha texted Kristen, "They are here." 2 hours later, she sent another text, "Get in place." It was all group effort. All the Westfalls were involved. As Nathan and Krystal walked out of the church, they were executed. Krystal stepped out first. A gun shot to the head. She died instantly. Nathan ran after her and was gunned down. As he lay on the ground, the person wielding the shotgun ended his life. The plan had been in the works for months. The Westfalls had even asked others to do it. They had approached many, but were refused. When no one else would do it, they decided to handle it themselves. In the aftermath, Cameron was charged with 2 counts of tampering with evidence. In exchange for his cooperation and testimony against his family, he received a 10-year sentence. Letha took a plea deal. She pleaded guilty to engaging in organized criminal activity and was sentenced to life with the possibility of parole after 30 years. Given her age, that was essentially a death sentence. Paul was supposed to go to trial, but was declared incompetent, and when was declared competent to stand trial, he pleaded guilty. The result? Life without the possibility of parole. And then there was Kristen. She refused to confess, even as 3 members of her own family testified against her. In August 2016, she went to trial. The motive was clear: custody. Nathan was on the rise while the Westfalls were falling apart. If things continued that way, Nathan could have gotten full custody of Maddie. The jury found her guilty. She was sentenced to life without the possibility of parole. But to truly understand how this tragedy unfolded, we need to look beyond the verdict and into the mindset behind it. When we break this crime down through the lens of criminal psychology, we see a mix of pathological entitlement, cognitive dissonance, and groupthink, all wrapped in a toxic family dynamic that made murder seem not only justifiable, but necessary. Entitlement played a massive role here. The Westfalls didn't just feel like Maddie belonged to them. They saw custody as their right. In psychology, this ties into narcissistic entitlement, where individuals believe they deserve control over others simply because they want it. Losing custody to Nathan wasn't just a legal setback, it was an insult, an existential threat to their identity. When people with a strong entitlement complex face resistance, they often lash out, sometimes violently, because they feel wronged, not just inconvenienced. Then there's cognitive dissonance, the psychological discomfort people feel when their actions contradict their beliefs. Most people, even criminals, don't see themselves as bad. So how do you justify murder when you've spent your whole life seeing yourself as a good parent and a good person? You shift the narrative. Instead of thinking, we're doing something terrible, they convince themselves that Nathan was the real villain, that they were saving Maddie, that this was a necessary evil. This kind of mental gymnastics is common in crimes involving family disputes. Once you reframe murder as protecting your own, it doesn't feel like a crime anymore. It feels like justice. And then we have groupthink, a psychological phenomenon where members of a group prioritize maintaining harmony and avoiding conflict. In this situation, people start reinforcing each other's ideas, even if they're flawed, because they want to stay united. As a result, critical thinking is pushed aside, leading to poor decision-making. In the Westfall's case, it's likely that any initial doubts got drowned out by their collective belief that they were doing the right thing. No one wanted to be the weak link, and once the plan was in motion, stopping would have meant admitting they were wrong, something their egos couldn't handle. That's the danger of living in an echo chamber. When no one challenges your worst ideas, they start to feel like facts. Paul's confession and later betraying Kristen also tie into survival psychology. When confronted with serious consequences, self-preservation kicks in. Even though he initially tried to cover for his family, his fear outweighed his loyalty. His brain was likely operating under stress-induced decision-making, where fear overrides rational thought, leading to desperate, impulsive actions, like throwing his daughter under the bus. Kristen, on the other hand, displayed delusional confidence, a trait often seen in individuals with antisocial tendencies. Even when the evidence was stacked against her, she doubled down, refusing to admit guilt. This could stem from a combination of psychopathy, where there's a complete lack of remorse or empathy, and a superiority complex that made her genuinely believe she was untouchable. Many criminals who refuse to plead guilty despite overwhelming evidence are operating on this kind of psychological denial. At its core, this crime was fueled by fear. Fear of losing Maddie, fear of losing control, fear of power slipping through their fingers. But time and time again, we see that when people let fear drive their actions, they end up orchestrating their own downfall. In trying to prevent their worst nightmare, they made it a reality, a textbook case of self-destruction in its most extreme form. And that brings us to the end of today's case. If you have any information or thoughtful insights about this case, please let us know respectfully in the comments section. Don't forget to like and subscribe to stay updated on future cases, and until next time when we explore another bone-chilling case right here on Slice of Darkness. Stay vigilant, stay safe.